We are Group 1, and today we're going to be talking about the graphic novel and in relation to Are You My Mother? So before we start this conversation, we want to talk about the history of the graphic novel and how that plays into giving Are You My Mother the platform that it does today. Because it was released, in March of this year? So yeah, who wants to start?
I think it was William Blake in the late 18th or early 19th century who is supposed to write the first graphic novel. And then a lot of people followed his example.
Yeah, and like the history, like in the research that I did, funny enough. What?
No, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, because like that one day in class I was talking about like going all the way back to like cavemen time, and so you've got two cavemen, now there's an interaction. Like, the research I found was like, yeah, so some of the earliest graphic novels have been considered cave paintings on walls, and
definitely.
But William Blake's, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell was like the first like notable example.
Also, it's kind of pretty interesting because when I grew up, I used to draw pictures on my walls. My mom used to get really angry, but then I used to write text under it. And we had to repaint the walls every month, but I think that's something that's it's something that happens to everyone, and it just kind of makes sense, like how we started writing and understanding all this stuff.
But so like when do you separate just like text and image pairing to okay, this is a graphic novel now, you know? Because I guess that would take us into the differences between comics and graphic novels, or children's books even. Why is this not a comic? Or like the stuff that you drew as a kid, or the stuff that William Blake does, would we call those graphic novels, or is it like, why is Blake the first one that would be a graphic novel? I think with him he was using really long text with the pictures, so maybe that's part of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, like, it's like, we kind of talked about before, it's like the actual, like, intellectual substance of whatever the content is, and it's kind of like a murky, like, the graphic novel, like, that term's been appropriated to anything that is, like, a text paired with an image, so it's like, the actual conventions are kind of murky for what qualifies one versus the other, but it kind of feels like it's stuff like the William Blake, like, that's about like a marriage, it's like a satirical response to like a religious writing like that came before that, and this is definitely a graphic novel because like it's engaging with like blatantly with like Winnicott and a bunch of thinkers and Freud and all that stuff, and psychoanalysis and father-daughter relationships and stuff. And then like another one that came up in my research was this book called A Contract with God, which is like, yeah, and there's a really kind of a heavy religious theme. Even in here, like, church is like a pretty prominent motif in this book. But yeah, and so that's just like about like these people that live in tenement buildings in, I think, New York in the 70s, and it's like about a Jewish tenement, and it's like really heavy, like kind of like tangible stuff. And I think that's what differentiates a graphic novel from like a comic book. A comic book is like superheroes or stuff that's like amalgamated, like serials from newspaper and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, because I was going to say, it depends on the medium that it comes in. Imagine you have this book, it's a hardcover. It feels like any other book had you not opened and seen that there are a lot of comics in here. Like you said, you associate the word comic or graphic novel with, you know, superheroes and Saturday morning cartoons and, you know, like in the newspaper class. So this gives it a different structure, so you're reading something on with a different mindset. And since it does bring in, you know, a little more concrete information, and like Bechtel, however you pronounce her last name, incorporates things like psychoanalysis, it tackles harder subjects than, well, that isn't to say that comic books don't tackle hard subjects. So it's a fine line that can be defined. I'm wrapping now.
The thing about these graphic novels is that, I mean, the pictures in this book, whenever I was flipping over the PDF on my laptop, I had this uncanny feeling that, oh, this could have been me, or, I mean, this was me, or this is someone I know, but I don't feel the same way look in or flip over graphic comic novels
Yeah.
because I'm not a superhero. I don't know a superhero.
That's the beauty of it, because it's like comic books and superheroes are more fantasy related, and this is grounded in reality because this is an autobiography piece. She actually drew from her family history and took photos and used those as inspiration for some of the photos that you'll see in the book.
There are a lot of comic books that are grounded in reality too. I think there can be, I mean, one doesn't, you know, a comic book and graphic novel is pretty much the same thing in terms of we're talking about, you know, text being integrated with image.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's definitely a kind of stigma attached towards like comic book, and you know, the graphic novel is definitely like on a higher kind of, you know, it's classier and they're more expensive and the hard, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no reason why like a comic book can't have all of those same elements and like that hodgepodge of everything that, the complexity that Bechtel brings to Are You My Mother?
Okay.
And I think that's kind of like part of her politic too. I mean, right on the front cover it says a comic drama.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't say a graphic novel. And she's like sort of owning the term comic, but then also it's a comic drama. It's almost like a little bit like oxymoronic or something.
Yeah,
like
it's
that,
funny that you
but-
mentioned that, because let's start talking about the title and the next portion of the question that we want to talk about. Are You My Mother is about this little birdie who came out of his egg and couldn't find his mother. So he went around the world basically going up to various things like, you know, other animals and inanimate objects and asking, oh, you my mother? No, didn't think so. And then like over the course of the story, he's plopped back into his nest, meets up with his mother, and is like, oh, you're my mother. You know, like you look like me, you're my mother, right? So with that said, Bechtel took that and then, like you said, added the subtitle, a comic drama, to it. And then you started breaking it down by saying like comic and then drama, and how those two genres are oxymorons, because comics we again associate with superheroes and fantasy, and drama is a little more rough and gritty and a little more realistic in the sense that, you know, this could happen to you.
Well, that's interesting because like this could happen to you. I mean, at least for me, I take it as it's the book is not trying to do any sort of like escapist technique, but then at the same time, I think part of the reason she had to do this as a graphic novel instead of a novel was a lot of it is like her dreams and her like illustrating these sort of fantasy things that are going through her mind, along with like the progress she's making with her mom. So I don't know. I mean, I agree with what you're saying, but also the like graphic element seems necessary when you're trying to talk about some of these things that are better served through images that are fantasy.
Also graphic, I think whenever I think about graphic, I think something's more vivid. And when I think about comic, something's more brighter. I mean, not, I mean, it's the same thing, but something opposite and vivid.
I think that's a good point. Are there specific portions of the novel where you felt like it was much stronger with the graphic added to it?
The use of the I feel as if since this is a lot about Winnicott and psychology, when I read Freud, it's very difficult to read just because these ideas are subconscious, and when you're reading this with words, it's difficult. And I think with a graphic novel, like in this page, 32, when she's talking about, she has a bunch of these images of her with her mother as a baby, and she says, I don't have the negatives, so there's no way to know the chronological order. But I arrange according to my own narrative. And one of the things that you could do with a comic or graphic novel is manipulate the space. Manipulate the space with these boxes. And by manipulating the space, you're manipulating time. And a lot of these dreams, like when we sleep, sometimes we'll sleep for 2 minutes and we think, like, I've slept for two hours. Or we might have slept for 2 hours. Oh, it's only been 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So this is one thing that you can't do with traditional text, or just with traditional text and like in a children's book, which is an image, and it's like
The content.
Yeah,
the body type.
it's more about the manipulation of these boxes.
I think it's very interesting that you bring up this page in particular because it breaks the lines of the comic grid. So
Yeah.
it kind of gives it that impression that you are looking at her desk, or you
Yeah.
are within her view, or you are looking directly down on her positions. Yeah.
Also on page number 35, the way the text, on page 35, the way the text is engaging. I mean, it's pretty unconventional in a way that is suited to be in a graphic novel.
Yeah, so that's something we were talking about before. Like, it's a lot of what she's dealing with in the novel is text-based. How she writes letters to her mom, how she's reading Winnicott, she's reading Adrian Rich. She keeps her diary, and then like Nina pointed out, this page of the text made as an image. That's another thing that I think makes the graphic novel necessary. But do you want to talk about like how we were mentioning the cop-out thing though with using these quotes?
Right, because we kind of talked about how like without the reliance on the image, like this book would kind of be like downright boring. Like
Oh, yeah.
with all of the excerpts from different thinkers she's talking about, and like the kind of cyclical, really redundant nature of like this entire book happens in her like recollection of episodes with her mother and her different like psychotherapists.
Yeah, so I get what you're saying, and I agree that this book wouldn't be the same without the images, but I don't think it's a cop-out. Like, you're absolutely right that, you know, this book can only exist as it is, you know, with the images, with the text, referencing all these different genres, you know, because, the visuals are so much a part of the story and the whole kind of vocabulary that she's developing throughout, like the red circles, you know, the red spots, do you guys remember that, like, just show up all the time, and they become like little symbols for, you know, highlighting something, you know, curious, unknown, or abject, like blood and guts and vomit and stuff like that, or something, you know. And they just like pop up in different contexts too, and so just initially I didn't know what they were supposed to be, but until you know, I just started connecting the dots through the whole story, and then and they also kind of act as like symbols for what I was thinking is like the transitional object, you know, that which seems to be like a recurring theme, you know, that red circle or spot kind of representing that space between me and not me.
Yeah, so cop-out's probably like the wrong term, but there's definitely like a reliance on the